She's number one in my heart, my best friend, the voice of reason in all of my campaigns. Lae'zel is a real one, and you cannot tell me otherwise. She keeps it real. She's one of the few companions that's very straightforward and straight up with you from the start. Lae'zel is pretty easy to read as well. She's honest and upfront about her thoughts and feelings, even when those thoughts and feelings are nothing but aggression. But she's so much more than her rough exterior, and her character growth is honestly kind of beautiful. Lae'zel literally spends the game learning how to love. Romantically, platonically, either way, her heart grows 3 sizes, and I'm not making the Grinch reference because both the characters are green. I care a lot about Lae'zel, and I will defend her forever, but it's not enough for me to just tell you how cool she is. I want to take you all on the journey of her character arc and unpacking her story. So, who is Lae'zel?
Since I was born in the cold reaches of world space, I have known but one purpose: to wield a silver sword and ride a red dragon in service of my regent, the Githyanki Queen Vlaakith. My first step on this path is to slay a mind flayer and bring its head to my queen. There is no flesh I will not carve, and no barrier I will not shatter to see it done. I am the one who sunders. I am the Undying Queen's most unshakable warrior. I am Lae'zel of Kalir.
Lae'zel is the Githyanki warrior. Born and raised in Gith culture, Lae'zel's main goal in life is to serve her undying queen. She has lofty goals of ascension, which is a Githyanki's greatest achievement, ascending to ride through the astral plane, fighting for Vlaakith. Lae'zel is fiercely loyal to her queen and her people. And if you know anything about the companion storyline so far, you may already see the writing on the wall. In some ways, Lae'zel's story parallels Shadowheart's story. It's not an exact parallel, but I have noticed a lot of the companions tend to parallel one another in some elements or power dynamics. But without further ado, let's dive into the full depths of Lae'zel. And this should go without saying, but major spoilers for the entire game in this video, so if you have not finished the game, be forewarned. Lae'zel is actually first introduced in the opening cinematic, and one of the few characters we meet in the prologue. It's her that gets infected first. We watch in horror as the mind flayer tadpole squirms into her eye socket, finding a home in her brain. It's her that we watch escape the pod as the ship comes under attack. It's her that we first meet once our own character awakens, just outside of the room where our pods were. Well, there's like 2 rooms. I wrote the script forgetting about the room with the cunty lobotomized elf. But she is the first person we meet that's not on the verge of death. She flies down, ready for battle, until she realizes that we are not Thrall, but a yet-to-be-affected victim just like her.
Your head throbs and your skin tingles. Visions rush past. A dragon's wing, a silver sword, and a flash of your face seen through the strange woman's eyes.
Oh, my head. What is this? Skvar, you are no thrall. Vlaakith blesses me this day. Together, we might survive.
Lae'zel is quick to lower her blade, expressing thanks that we are a potential ally, and together we can fight our way through the nautiloid. It's actually her that pushes for us to go to the helm, where we'll be able to escape Avernus, and hopefully the mind flayers once we land in a safer location. Lae'zel is very down to business from the get-go, which makes sense all things considered. She knows a lot about mind flayers. The Githyanki are a race of people who used to be mind flayer slaves or thrall, and they were able to break free, and they spend their whole lives basically training to fight mind flayers, so she is extremely knowledgeable about what we're facing, which is very helpful. I also find it interesting to note that she doesn't seem to care for picking up stragglers other than you when it comes to saving Shadowheart. And in her defense, it makes sense because we are already out of our pods and walking and Shadowheart is not. Her reluctance to helping Shadowheart out of the pod is usually taken as a point towards her neutral or bad-leaning morality, depending on how you're reading her. But I'd like to make the argument that this is showcasing her fear and urgency. For a Githyanki, the worst thing that could happen to them is becoming a mind flayer. Lae'zel is currently kidnapped and infected by the very thing she's been raised to fight against. We're also on a ship that is currently under attack by dragons and other Githyanki. She knows more than anyone just how dire this situation is. Lae'zel knows our time is limited. This isn't her refusing to help someone in need for the sake of refusing help. She genuinely believes that we do not have the time to stop and help Shadowheart. Taking the time to help would likely doom us all in her eyes. She doesn't know that this is a video game and we could theoretically spend forever on this nautiloid without any consequences. So it makes sense that she's like, hey, we don't have time to help everybody, let's go save ourselves. I don't think that's a point towards her being a bad person. I honestly think Lae'zel is a very kind-hearted person once you get past all the Githyanki socializations. Shadowheart in tow or not, you and Lae'zel will fight your way through to the helm, and eventually you end up back in Faerun, crashing down somewhere on the Sword Coast. But when you awaken, Lae'zel is nowhere to be seen. If you helped Shadowheart out, she'll just be a few feet away from you on the beach, and as you explore the area, you'll find other victims scattered throughout, but still no sign of Lae'zel. Shadowheart assumes that she's left us behind, went her own way, not considering us allies any longer, but as you get closer to the Emerald Grove, you'll soon learn that's not the case at all. Lae'zel was captured instead, a couple of tieflings standing near the trap that Lae'zel has been caught in. They talk about how dangerous she is, and it's pretty clear that they aim to either kill her or keep her prisoner, partially for their own safety or who knows. They're very afraid of her. As you approach the scene, Lae'zel uses the tadpole connection to ask for your help. She recognizes you and knows that you are someone that she can reasonably count on. It's up to you if you heed her quest or tease her a bit first. She will not say please though. Whether you fight the tieflings or convince them to leave the scene, Lae'zel will be grateful that you helped her out. Let's get Lae'zel on board.
The tadpole hasn't yet scrambled all your senses. Auspicious.
Okay, I know she's actually a bit abrasive here, and some would interpret this as rude, but she's grateful. Trust me. She does later tell us that Gith culture doesn't even have an equivalent to saying thank you, so expressing gratitude is a foreign concept to her. But we can see her gratitude and kindness in her next actions. Lae'zel shares with us that the tieflings had been talking about encountering other Githyanki in the area, which means a crèche must be nearby. A crèche is essentially a Githyanki community, pretty much where Gith are hatched and raised, a training ground for these young warriors, a place where they live, more or less. She shares with us that there is a cure for our tadpole situation at the crèche, and she offers to take us with her, helping us out as well. Now, it's my understanding that this willingness to share and help outsiders is not typical of Githyanki. It's rather soft of Lae'zel to offer this cure to us and our companions. Githyanki are proud of their race and carry an air of superiority, looking down on other life forms pretty much. They look out for their own, and even then, Lae'zel makes Gith culture sound very harsh and victim-blamey, so they really don't even look out for their own. This understanding goes a long way to show us that Lae'zel is not as mean as she first comes off as. And let's be clear, I am not saying she doesn't come off as mean and aggressive, because she definitely does. And we all know that gaining approval for her in early Act 1 means forcing some guy to bow to her. And I'll be honest, this does feel more like showing her as a dominant personality and kind of showing what to expect from her in more intimate settings, because if you romance her, especially her Act 1 romance scene, she is very dominating. So that's what that feels like to me, but it can also be read as her being a little bit cruel and aggressive and just not the nicest person. It's how she comes off in early Act 1 at least. But generally, she does approve of actions that are direct and efficient. She is prioritizing the tadpole situation, so she does disapprove of choices that get in the way of curing the tadpole business. She's not here to dilly-dally and spend time helping other people with what she considers to be less serious problems. In her eyes, we are on the brink of death, or even worse, becoming a lithid. She doesn't approve of being outright cruel and is fine with you being heroic. She just wants us to stay on topic, more or less. She doesn't want us getting distracted, basically. And funnily enough, Lae'zel actually calls Astarion out for being a bloodthirsty asshole when he makes a comment about how he was disappointed she didn't kill the tiefling we interrogate in the grove.
Oh, you're not going to eviscerate him? I was hoping for a show.
Cool your blood. I'll indulge you soon enough.
So it's pretty clear to me that Lae'zel is not as bloodthirsty and cruel as some may think. She fights when necessary, sure, but she doesn't indulge in bloodshed for the sake of bloodshed. After finding a lead for where the crèche may be, Lae'zel is actually pretty patient with us when it comes to exhausting our other options. Yes, I know that this is because the game is not forcing us to do things in a certain way or a certain order, but it's implied characterization. Lae'zel will tell us that we should go to the crèche, but she will not force us. She works with us willingly to rescue Halsin from the goblin camp, our other lead for a cure. She understands that we may want to try this other path first, and that we may be inclined to help the tiefling refugees before making our way up to the crèche. She doesn't even threaten to leave the party if you refuse to go to the crèche until you make it to Moonrise Towers in Act 2. That paints the picture of an incredibly patient and loyal woman, if you ask me. She's committed to working with our little ragtag group of infected adventurers, even if that means prolonging what she is 120% certain will be a cure waiting for us at the crèche with the fellow Githyanki. But she's gonna work with us to eradicate the goblins, see if Halsin can help us, maybe even hit up Auntie Ethel first. She's committed to our group and our friendship. The fierce and fearless warrior persona that she starts with begins to melt away, though, as we travel with Lae'zel. One long rest after crossing the bridge at the goblin camp and triggering the first encounter with the Absolute, Lae'zel will approach you, ready to slice your throat. She talks about how she feels that you are all about to transform into mind flayers, something you all should have already done at this point. She's clearly shaken by this possibility, but is duty-bound to eliminating everyone at camp who is infected and then herself to prevent the transformations. However, you are able to easily convince her that everything is fine, that it's just an illness that'll pass, and she concedes, saying she cannot trust her own mind. She's placed so much trust in your hands. She's placed her life in your hands. She's gonna take your word over hers. However, she does promise that if the feeling does not pass, her execution plan is still on. And I would also like to add that earlier in Act 1, like for your very first long rest, if it's early enough, she's gonna be like, yo, bud, why are we resting? We have things to do. Like, she's very worried and concerned, like more so than anybody else seemingly, about the tadpole. Everyone else is pretty chill to take things at a leisurely pace, but Lae'zel is like, buddy, my guy, my pal. Huh? How can you rest so easily when we have this dooming fate lingering in the horizon? Like, let's deal with the tadpoles, bud. We don't have time. So, I do think that's coming from a place of fear on her part. And back with the scene where she attempts to murder you, this look at her fear is raw, and we can see that she's in over her head, and it makes sense. Lae'zel is in a foreign realm, surrounded by strangers and strange customs, with her imminent doom on the horizon. Lae'zel is out of her element, tossed into the thick of it with nothing but a mind flayer parasite and a dream. Anyone would be scared out of their mind in this situation, and quite frankly, it would be weird if she wasn't scared. It's very common for people to feel fear and very out of place and isolated when going through new experiences. Adjusting to new environments is incredibly difficult for the vast majority of us, and Lae'zel is going through that at an extreme level. So it is understandable that she would be fearful and wanting to get to a cure as quick as possible. And honestly, it would be wild if she wasn't. But despite her fears, she is able to cling to the teachings that she grew up with. She clings to her loyalty to Vlaakith, and that helps her push through. Lae'zel is also very sure of herself when it comes to battle. She's a fighter and has spent her whole life learning how to fight and proving herself a force to be reckoned with. She'll make comments about how in Gith culture the weak are often purged through battle or whatnot, so she knows that she does have some level of skill that surpasses some. These combat skills are how she honors and serves Vlaakith, and it is also worthy to note that Githyanki kind of see themselves as more powerful beings, or that's the vibe that they give off in this game, that they are stronger and more powerful than non-Githyanki life forms. At least that's how that comes off to me whenever I come across the Githyanki in this game. But we can see Lae'zel's loyalty to Vlaakith and her assuredness and her skills when she confronts Shadowheart about the Gith relic that she carries. Loyalty to her queen and her people, Lae'zel demands answers and calls Shadowheart a thief, and seeks to reclaim the relic on behalf of the Githyanki people, not even knowing that there's a group of Githyanki already looking for it. 2 groups if you think about it. Self-confident in her combat abilities, Lae'zel is quick to ask for a one-on-one fight with Shadowheart, seemingly sure that she'd win. Lae'zel doesn't see it as a risk, and quite frankly, per customs she grew up with, if she were to lose, it would be deserved. A failing on her part that deemed her unworthy to continue to live and serve Vlaakith. If you were able to appease the situation though without Shadowheart or Lae'zel killing one another, Lae'zel is seemingly fine to move on like nothing happened. Our unbothered queen. She expresses a sentiment that through conflict people are able to strengthen their bonds, but she's not keen on Shadowheart seeking more conflict with her, which is funny since Lae'zel was definitely the one who started this, even though it ended with Shadowheart sneaking up on her while everyone slept. Shadowheart didn't start this fight, but she was damn sure going to end it. In Lae'zel's eyes, though, she did her part to appease her sense of duty towards her people, but she concedes her loss. Lae'zel is fiercely loyal to Vlaakith, but she is also loyal to us and our group. This whole conflict with Shadowheart, though, and the resolution also shows us that Lae'zel was raised in a very aggressive culture, if you hadn't picked up on that based on what she has said by now. But if you remove her from that aggressive environment, she's going to adapt. Yes, she's still aggressive, but her willingness to solve things semi-peacefully and drop the conflict seems to not add up with what I have grown to expect from a Githyanki in Baldur's Gate 3. Disclaimer though, pretty much everything I know about Githyanki culture comes from what Lae'zel tells me, what I've observed in the game, and what people have corrected me on in the comment section of my YouTube videos, which I acknowledge is not a full picture of things. I am very well aware of that, but we are looking at things in context of Baldur's Gate 3 specifically. So Lae'zel is almost a subversion of what one would expect a Githyanki to be like. Yes, on the surface, she matches up with the stereotypes, but when you spend more than a couple minutes around her and look at her actual actions, we start to see a Githyanki who is willing to work with outsiders as equals, willing to appease conflicts without bloodshed, willing to help fellow victims of Mind Flayer tadpoles, despite them not being Gith, and despite pretty much every other Githyanki in this game considering us a lost cause and already a Mind Flayer thrall, just on the nature of being kidnapped and infected, and every Githyanki in the game is basically like, death will be your cure, bestie. Lae'zel clings to her faith and to hope that she'll be cured in Vlaakith's name, and she seeks to share that hope with us. She wants us to come along with her. She's grown attached to us in the short time that we've spent together, in the time that we've spent fighting side by side. The Githyanki are often described to me as a race of people who believe they are superior to any other race. And we see that the Gith in the game are very, very proud of who they are, just by nature of being Githyanki, and they look down on others who are not Githyanki. But Lae'zel does not do that, at least not to the same degree as the other Gith in the game. Sure, she makes comments alluding to her superior skill, and at the start of the game, she is definitely prideful. But she sets that pride aside to work with us. She adapts to her new environment instead of forcing the environment to adapt to her. She seems excited to share more about Githyanki culture with us, but she's also interested in learning about Faerun, which can be seen when you correct her on her pronunciation of the word tiefling and Faerun.
I am unfamiliar with the, well, I shall not say culture, custom perhaps. You will educate me on matters of this Faerun.
Actually, it's Faerun. She asks you to educate her, showing an interest, and she could have easily brushed it off as a stupid, irrelevant thing, but she shows that she's interested in learning. Faerun is worth learning about in her eyes, even if she is a bit embarrassed and rude about it. I thought it was a really fun and cute scene that seems to not really say a whole lot, but when you think about the Githyanki as a whole, I feel like it says a lot about Lae'zel that she's like, you know what? Yeah, I do actually want to learn about Faerun. I'm a little embarrassed that I got this wrong, and I would like to learn more. Please teach me. Even if she didn't say it like that. That's, at least that's how I'm interpreting it. The catalyst of Lae'zel's character arc, though, is when we go to the crèche. Typically, it's gonna be like the last thing you do in Act 1. She's certain that the Zaith'isk will cure her. She's faithful to Vlaakith and the teachings that she was brought up with. So Lae'zel is 110% certain that she will be cured once she reaches the crèche. She feels that she is owed a cure due to her loyalty and her faith. She pretty much says as much to any Githyanki who question her along the way. However, her loyalty starts to falter when she hides the fact that your group is in possession of the artifact that the Githyanki are in search of. It's easy to persuade her into deceiving Kithrak Voss when we first come across him. However, she is a little bit regretful. She can't believe that she did that, but she can understand and reason with the fact that this artifact is what's keeping you all from transforming and losing your freedom to this absolute. So she'll rock with it for now. But as you enter the crèche, Lae'zel falls right back into her duty to her people. She places all of her trust on this group of strangers just by sheer virtue of them being Githyanki and also followers of Vlaakith. Lae'zel is in her element, though, and once we make it to the infirmary, it's best to let her take the lead. She'll share her condition with the doctor, Gustil. Honestly, Gustil reminds me of Hanji from Attack on Titan, but instead of being fanatic for these giant monstrosities, Gustil is bordering fanatic about the Mind Flayer tadpoles that she's been investigating and experimenting on. But that may be due to the fact that the tadpoles relating back to the Absolute cult have been altered with magic, so it's not your average Mind Flayer tadpole. So I can understand the enthusiasm to explore and learn more about this thing, especially considering that the Gith already know a lot about Mind Flayers, so they would know that this is like extra weird and would probably want to get to the bottom of it. Gustil will then lead your group to the Zaith'isk, where you can be purified. Lae'zel does ask or urges to be the one who gets purified first, and I always let her. It's big approval points, and also it just makes sense to let her go first. I mean, this is her thing, so it just makes sense to me. However, once Lae'zel is in the Zaith'isk and the device is activated, it becomes painfully clear that this is not the cure she was hoping for. Through shared pain, the Dream Guardian, and just strange vibes, we are able to know that the Zaith'isk is killing Lae'zel. There is no cure, no purification, just death. The whole point of the Zaith'isk is to extract the memories of the person in it and kill them. That's it. You can attempt to persuade Lae'zel into removing herself from the device, but it is a very, very difficult role. However, if you do fail to persuade her, the Zaith'isk will break, leaving her uncured, but still alive, due to interference from the Dream Guardian. So, luckily for me, because I always fail these rolls here, luckily for me, we can't lose her yet. When the Zaith'isk breaks, though, Lae'zel does not realize that it was working as intended. Gustel is upset that her life's work has been ruined, and Lae'zel is so certain that Gustel was trying to kill her out of like a malicious desire or some sort of betrayal. Not that that's what was supposed to happen. It's honestly hard watching Lae'zel try to rationalize what happened without acknowledging that there was no cure, that the only cure was death. Still clinging to Githyanki loyalty and hope for this cure that she was promised, Lae'zel feels she must report Gustel to the Inquisitor for her betrayal. The Inquisitor is basically like a leadership position that works directly with Vlaakith, from my understanding. So, the Inquisitor is a big deal. Lae'zel is still holding on to the idea that she can get help from the crèche, ignoring what seems to be clear and obvious to the player. When we make it to where we can report Gustel, the leadership in this crèche is not interested in a seeming traitor amongst them. Instead, they are almost entirely focused on recovering the artifact in which we carry. Lae'zel urges us to work with the Githyanki and giving them the relic. She sees it as the best thing to do in this situation, still believing that we can obtain a cure from the Gith. Either through fighting or being allowed in, you make your way down to where the Inquisitor is, but instead of talks about a traitor or a cure, we are met with a mission from Vlaakith herself. Enter the artifact, the Astral Prism, and slay the abomination inside. Lae'zel is still fully devoted to Vlaakith, considering it an honor to do this for her, and being pretty much starstruck that Vlaakith even knew her name. Lae'zel will be upset with you if you do not show respect and like bow to Vlaakith. It's also just a good way to get Lae'zel approval if you are farming that. But during this, Lae'zel is promised a cure for herself and the rest of us. She's promised ascension as well. This is everything to her. This is everything a young Githyanki in the situation could have asked for, and more. So into the prism we go, because why wouldn't we? If you've played this far in the game, then you know that we are tasked with killing the Dream Guardian, and we can either decide not to, or kill them only to find out that they cannot be killed, at least not in the form that we are witnessing. And when you go back to the group, Lae'zel is upset about this inability to follow Vlaakith's orders, but she eventually understands. That was a really quick rundown. Regardless of if you attempt to kill the Guardian or not, you and Lae'zel have new information that Lae'zel feels Vlaakith needs to know. We know that the Dream Guardian knows something that'll ruin Vlaakith's rule. We know that the power that the Dream Guardian uses was stolen and is likely related to Vlaakith in some sort of sense. It's gonna bring her demise. Lae'zel rushes out of the prism, begging to speak with Vlaakith once more, begging to share what she's learned, whether that's this thing is fucking unkillable and it knows how to topple you, or just the threat to topple her. But we're met with a fight instead. The narrator reveals to the player that regardless of what happened in the Astral Prism, the Githyanki were given orders to kill us. Again, the cure promised is death. After fighting through the crèche, Lae'zel is left feeling confused and betrayed. She struggles with where to place the blame. Is it true that Vlaakith is not as cracked up as she seems to be? Or was it a faulty crèche betraying her? As the party leaves the mountain pass during a long rest, Kithrak Voss will visit camp, sharing with us that he is rebelling against Vlaakith, and basically revealing to the player where the blame needs to lie here. He explains that Vlaakith is a liar and not someone who needs to be worshipped or have this power that she has, and he asks us to ally with him and help him, believing us to know the truth of the Astral Prism, believing that we know what Vlaakith is hiding and that we know about Orpheus. If you already know about the Orpheus legend or have played the game before, when in the crèche, you'll also notice a comet drawn onto the painting of Vlaakith, which is a symbol of the rebellion, a symbol of Orpheus. It's a fun little detail, but one I like to believe Voss drew to like signal to allies or something. I'm not really sure. It really could have been drawn by anyone, but in my mind, I just think it's so fun to think of Voss vandalizing this painting. Lae'zel can't believe the blasphemy she's hearing from Voss, but she still hears him out. She's willing to entertain a world where Vlaakith is a liar, to entertain a world where she aids a rebellion against the queen that she has devoted her life to. Lae'zel is starting to piece things together. The seeds of doubt were planted, and Voss has shown up to water them. But she's got the journey into Baldur's Gate to mull things over. Lae'zel is honestly just chilling in Act 2 as much as anyone could be. I feel like I've said this in every Unpacking Whoever video, but Act 2 is where Shadowheart shines, and most of the other companions take a back seat to her storyline, much in the same way that everyone took a back seat to Lae'zel's storyline in the Mountain Pass. However, if you are romancing Lae'zel, her Act 2 romance scene is honestly worth talking about and shows just how far her character has grown, how the love and friendship she has experienced in your group has started to change her. Lae'zel will come to you, requesting a duel, more or less, to prove your worth to her as a partner. If you beat her, the duel ends, and she's like, "You are the reason for my bruises. How romantic, how cute, y'all are a thing." And it's like, it definitely leans into a relationship dynamic that is like mutual possession, and it works for Lae'zel, considering Gith. But the part of this that really shows her growth is if Lae'zel beats you instead. Lae'zel stops the duel. She's distraught at the idea of hurting you. She wants to protect you, and she wants you to protect her. It's a level of emotional vulnerability that seems to be new for her. As if she's realizing what love is for the first time. We have no way of knowing if Lae'zel has ever been in a romantic relationship before. She has shared previously that the Githyanki pretty much don't have to worry about pregnancy, so they can seek all the physical pleasures they wish, and there's nothing to worry about. It's clear that she's slept with people in the past, and she's not shy about expressing her physical desires. But emotional intimacy, romance, friendship even, all of this could likely be very new to her. If you know a lot about Gith just outside of Baldur's Gate, can you confirm if they're a culture that does do emotional intimacy? Because it feels like to me they don't, but I don't know if that's just because the game doesn't really have much of an opportunity to delve into that, or if is this a thing, more or less? Whether that was a valid reading of Lae'zel and Gith culture, by the time you reach Act 2, Lae'zel has started coming to terms with the fact that her life has been built on a lie. Vlaakith isn't what she's cracked up to be. She's been named a traitor and has been abandoned by her people, more or less. All Lae'zel has is you and your ragtag group of weirdos. But y'all are her weirdos, and she cares deeply. The relationships between the companions are only ever hinted at when they comment on each other's big story beats, but it seems clear to me that the entire group grows closer as friends, or more depending on how you read certain interactions and silly little party banter as the game goes on. Lae'zel, possibly for the first time in her life, has a group of people that she has grown to care for unconditionally. Has a person that she loves in a romantic sense and wishes to protect and be protected by. If you would have told Act 1 Lae'zel that she would have had a desire to be protected, she probably would have, at the very least, laughed it off and threatened to skin you alive for such a preposterous lie. I mean, how ridiculous could that be? But here she is, loving and being loved, protecting and being protected. As a team unit, as a friend, as a romantic partner, as a person worth protecting. Something that I feel like isn't a concept in Gith culture, at least not in the way that she talks about it. At the very least, Lae'zel was not raised in an environment where people were worth protecting. You protected yourself and that was it. is the vibe that I always get. So this seems very revolutionary to Lae'zel and a really important beat in her character arc. At the end of Act 2, the final long rest, the transition between the Shadow-Cursed lands and Act 3, Camp is awoken one night by pleas from the Dream Guardian. A portal opens up and we are attacked by Gith monks. This is where the player learns the true identity of the Dream Guardian and the true nature of the power that protects us. A mind flayer that's using the power of Orpheus to protect us. Orpheus being the Gith prince who's been held captive inside the astral prism. The very being that would undo Vlaakith. The being who would allow for the Githyanki to break free from Vlaakith's rule. The being that saved them from the mind flayers however long ago, and the being that Vlaakith has been telling everyone is dead. I do not know much about Gith politics beyond what the game tells me, and the game does present this Orpheus freeing the other Gith as a good thing to do. It's not touched on that Orpheus is seeking world domination or anything like that. People keep telling me in my comment section on the Emperor video that Orpheus is a genocidal maniac and it's not a good thing to free him. And while that may be true for Forgotten Realms lore, and Baldur's Gate 3 does take a lot from Forgotten Realms lore, I don't think that's entirely relevant to Baldur's Gate 3 and not a factor in Lae'zel's character arc. There are quite a few instances of Baldur's Gate ignoring established elements of lore for the sake of crafting their own narrative and building up their themes, and I do believe that that's the case here with Orpheus. Orpheus is kind of a tool in Lae'zel's story, in a sense. She now holds proof that Githrak Voss was telling the truth, proof that Orpheus lives despite what Vlaakith tells her people, proof that Vlaakith is not what she makes herself out to be, proof that Lae'zel's seeds of doubt were warranted. And I think this does help her come into her own. Early into Act 3, you are able to meet up with Voss again as he is pleading with Raphael to make a deal for the Orphic Hammer, the tool to freeing Orpheus. Raphael states that Voss does not have anything he wants and instead turns to us. We could get the Orphic Hammer, and in return, all we'd have to do is pass the crown of Karsus to him. A very easy thing, and it costs us nothing. Unless you wanted to ascend Gale to godhood, but like technically you could still do both, because I've seen an ending where Gale ascends as a god and doesn't give the crown to Raphael, and it's kind of sick. It's a cool ending. Beside the point, it's something Raphael has wanted for a long time, and now is his chance. We can make a deal right here, right now, and get the hammer, securing a way to free Orpheus and securing a way to basically start the revolution and the freedom of the Githyanki people. Or we can deny the deal and find our own way to break into Raphael's house and steal the hammer for ourselves, or just ignore it altogether. But since we're talking about Lae'zel and we're caring and loving Lae'zel, we're probably not ignoring that quest. I do prefer breaking into Raphael's house though, because I do not trust him with the power of the crown. And also, that's a fun part of the game. Sure, Raphael has been nothing but mostly honest with us and is not the worst guy we've come across, but is he really the person that should have the power of the crown of Karsus? Should he really have the power to combine all 9 layers of hell, bring everyone together in unity? That's a discussion for another day. But if you refuse the deal, Voss will be upset, but he does understand and trust you to find another way to get the hammer, which is wild considering he barely knows us. Lae'zel does not have to be present for any of this, but if she is, she does urge the player to consider the deal and to free her prince, to free her people. But she does understand the unwillingness to hand Raphael all that power, and she does get it. She levels with you. She trusts that you will find another way, and for Lae'zel, I feel like that trust is warranted and well placed. Voss, though, he's just letting Lae'zel vouch for us. And I don't think he's ever met Lae'zel in his life before the game. So it's kind of funny that Voss is like, yeah, no, I'll trust you. But we are his last hope, so I guess it makes sense. One long rest shortly after this encounter, Vlaakith will visit camp, basically throwing a temper tantrum.
The betrayer Voss lies!
Vlaakith will try to bend Lae'zel to her will, asking her to slay Orpheus, claiming that she'll be honored and ascended. Lae'zel will share with you her desire to stand her ground and not be manipulated by Vlaakith, and it is up to you to support her in this decision, or convince her to bend to Vlaakith's will. Pushing Lae'zel to bend to Vlaakith's will leads to her bad ending, which we'll talk about when we get to the epilogue, but if you support Lae'zel in her desire to stay true to herself, she'll stand up for herself. Pushing Lae'zel to bend to Vlaakith's will does lead to her bad ending, which we will talk about when we get to the epilogue. But if you support Lae'zel in her desire to stay true to herself, she'll stand up against Vlaakith and be deemed a traitor. But it's not her who has sinned against Vlaakith. It is Vlaakith who has sinned against her. One of the sickest lines in the entire game. Lae'zel was so real for that. Lae'zel is strong in her convictions, and she will not be shaken. Lae'zel is very sure of herself. She's very confident in her decisions, especially now that she knows the truth about Orpheus. Lae'zel is the unshakable force. At least without your persuasion. She trusts you and your traveling companions more than she trusts her own goddess that she has spent her entire life living for. She'd put her life in your hands in a heartbeat, and she trusts you not to betray her, which is why I feel like you even are able to persuade her to go against everything she has learned and side with Vlaakith. I feel like her trust in us, her love for us, her friendship with us, is what allows us to manipulate her into doing something that she is so against. And you can also see that, honestly, with every companion when it comes to convincing them to use the tadpole powers, because I've seen that you can convince Lae'zel to be like chill with it, which is wild. Why would you do that to her? For the most part, that's kind of where Lae'zel's story kind of plateaus until the ending. Mostly because if you do not keep Lae'zel in your party, there's a really good chance that she's going to spend most of Act 3 kidnapped by Orin, just hanging out in the Temple of Baal. So it's a good thing her big story moments took place earlier than the other companions. But when you do finally save her, she is incredibly grateful. And for me, it's typically been towards the end of the game, because when Orin said that if I show up without killing Gortash, she was going to kill Lae'zel, I took that literally, and so Orin was always like the last thing I did before going to the end stages of the game. That's not actually, you don't actually have to do it that way, that's just what I was led to believe, so that's how I've always played it. But anyway, after you save Lae'zel, she expresses her gratitude in the best way that she can.
It is not in a Githyanki's nature to say thank you. Our language doesn't even have a phrase for it. Kraith Khan Jan is the closest equivalent I know. May your enemies know agony. But after releasing me from Orin's grip, there is only one proper response. Thank you.
That's my best
Sincerely.
friend right there. Lae'zel has to have felt the gratitude so strongly that her normal ways of expressing it were not enough. She has so much respect for the player that she searches for the ways that feeling is normally expressed in Faerun, so that you can fully understand what she is trying to convey. I think it's neat how Lae'zel shares so much of her culture with the player, letting us get to know her and where she's coming from, and how she tries to make connections with what we would be used to. I also find it great that her picking up on Faerun customs is not done in a way that feels like she's assimilating. She still retains her distinct cultural upbringing, things that are very unique to Lae'zel and growing up in Crèche Kalir. And she shares that with us just as much as we share our own cultures with her. We're literally just hanging out in a multicultural camp, and it's great. We're having a good time. And I feel like getting to know so much about the Gith through Lae'zel makes us feel for the Githyanki, making the choice of freeing Orpheus and in turn starting the catalyst that'll free the Githyanki from Vlaakith's rule, or damning them all and siding with the Emperor, a difficult choice. At least that's true for a player who may not be familiar with the Githyanki outside of the game. There's so much to D&D and lore surrounding it that it's so easy to play for years and consume so much content about it and still not know about certain things. And honestly, part of me thinks that the game didn't intend for us to bring in this outside information about the Githyanki into this decision at the end, as I mentioned earlier. Yes, outside information can elevate the stories being told, but with something as big as, hey, this guy that you're thinking about freeing, that we're framing as a potentially better choice is actually a genocidal maniac, it's never brought up in the game. It never comes up. And I feel like that was intentional. I really do feel like that was intentional. I have seen people talk about how that detail informed their decisions here, led them to thinking that siding with the Emperor is always the better choice. But given the themes of the game and the way things play out, I do not think that was what the game had in mind with this choice. It's simply work with this mind flayer who has manipulated us along the way to ensure his freedom and security and survival, or free the man who will, in turn, free an entire group of people from a corrupt queen who is only using them to maintain her own immortality and power. When you word it that way, one choice is objectively better if you are valuing the lives of people that are not yourself. Not to say you have to play the game that way, because this is a fantasy game, you can play it whatever way you want. But we do agree that the good choice is usually the more heroic choice in terms of assigning morality to the stories being told. Not that it's like the best way to play the game. I am not here to tell people how to play the game. I feel like I need to make that clear. Lae'zel feels very strongly about the freedom of Githyanki. She's seen firsthand the lies and the deception of the Lich Queen we call Blackith. It's presented to us as a good thing to strive for, and honestly, I am inclined to agree, and that's not just because Lae'zel has me whipped. However, I do find it really neat that Lae'zel, despite being upset at Orpheus's fate if he does become a mind flayer to stop the Absolute at the end of the game, she's not mad at us for not making that sacrifice. She understands the weight of that choice, and she understands why we would not want to make that choice after fighting so hard to find a cure. She mourns her prince, sure, but she doesn't let that stop her. She doesn't hold that against us. She was in our shoes, and if this were not a video game, Lae'zel would have had just as much agency to intervene as we did. She's just as responsible as the player. And yet, she doesn't step up. She doesn't make that sacrifice. As far as I know, the only character who volunteers to sacrifice themselves is Karlach. Although, now that I'm saying that, I think I might have seen a clip where somebody got Lae'zel to do it. But, I need to fact check things more often. Karlach does, though, more willingly volunteer for it. And that's because she knows she's fated to die soon anyway. I do feel like before the game, Lae'zel would have probably pushed for someone to make that sacrifice and hold it against you if you didn't, especially considering that Githyanki consider themselves the superior beings. So a sacrifice of a human or an elf or a tiefling or a gnome or whatever it is that you're playing as would not hit as hard because you're not her equal. I know I said earlier that she is kinder and softer than the rest of the Githyanki, but when it comes to something as big as freeing Orpheus and not dooming him to be a mind flayer, I could understand if she would be a bit less kind. This is a really big deal, and it's also just unclear at the start how much Lae'zel actually does look down on those who are not Githyanki. She does express a bit of superiority, but just how deep did that run? Either way, Lae'zel has grown past that and sees us all as just people, doing our best with the cards we're dealt, and she too is just doing her best with what she has. And sometimes that means letting your prince make a grave sacrifice for the greater good. Sometimes that's being a bit selfish after being so selfless throughout this journey, depending on how you play. I know not everyone is playing selflessly, but that sentence just worked really well. So I wanted to say it. We are all just trying to live, Lae'zel included. And I think that's beautiful. Lae'zel has 3 main variations in her epilogue ending. If you encourage Lae'zel to stay with her convictions and stay true to herself, there's a couple of different ways her story can end. Now, for the most part, there is absolutely no difference between saving Orpheus and sacrificing yourself to being a mind flayer, or letting Orpheus make that sacrifice when it comes to Lae'zel's endings. She fights across the cosmos to free her people. She'll either train under Orpheus if he's alive, or take on his dragons if he sacrifices himself. But either way, Lae'zel will find herself relying on her words more than her blade, something she's learned from you. She's currently working on securing an alliance with the Githzerai, a different faction of Gith that do not follow Vlaakith, and due to her mission, she can't actually come to the Epilogue party, but she does astral project herself, and she seems happy and excited with what she's doing. She's learning and exploring the importance of diplomacy and using her words instead of fighting to get what she needs, and that is a far cry from where Lae'zel started at, and I think that's so cool. It's not a bad ending. Even if she does deserve to take it easy after all we went through, she is still left with a future that allows for her to continue to grow and continue to thrive, and it doesn't walk back on any character development that she may have gone through throughout this game. However, in an ending that might potentially be better depending on how you look at it, you can persuade Lae'zel to live for herself, to stay in Faerûn and carve out her own path. If you pick this option, she'll stay, and at the Epilogue party, she's there in person, and will share with you that she's been making friends and living life and just having a good time. It's a great ending for her that lets her explore herself outside of her duty to her people, because Lae'zel is just a very duty-bound character throughout most of the game. So it's kind of nice to give her a break from that level of responsibility. Just let her live. Just let her have a life and hang out. And that's great. I love that for her. I'm not really sure which of these 2 endings is like the best for her. I'm pretty certain it's probably just up to personal preference. She seems happy and fulfilled in both of these endings, but I can understand how having the weight of freeing an entire people on your shoulders can be a lot, and while she does seem happy to do the work, she should not have to shoulder that responsibility. I'm not entirely sure where this information comes from. It might come from that one mobile game that all the Baldur's Gate characters are getting put into, but we have been told that Lae'zel is like 22. Whether that's exactly accurate or not, we know she's young. She should be living life. She should be at the club. which is basically the letting her hang out in Faerûn ending. Both of these endings, though, seem to work well with her character growth throughout the game. Again, none of it gets walked back. She gets to thrive and flourish and explore different conflict resolutions and make connections with people and live in a way that is not typical of the aggressive and battle-driven Githyanki culture that she grew up in. But I would really love to hear what you guys think on these 2 endings and which one you prefer, and maybe why. Because, like I said, like I guess it's like the Shadowheart and sacrificing her parents or saving her parents endings, where both of them is technically good, and it really is just up to personal preference. So I would like to hear your thoughts. But if you push for Lae'zel to go back to Vlaakith, she will ascend, just as Vlaakith has been promising her. But ascension is death. It's dying, becoming a sacrifice to help Vlaakith maintain herself as a lich. Lae'zel is snuffed out, and that's it. Withers will say that for Githyanki, the measure of a single mortal life is just a single evening supper for the Lich Queen. To be ascended is to be consumed. And I think we can all agree that this is her bad ending, the worst outcome for her. Like, that doesn't seem very controversial. It may sound crazy what I'm about to say, but I do believe that the companions were made to parallel each other, and Lae'zel does parallel a lot of the companions. I think Lae'zel and just the entire Githyanki people striving to ascend to be consumed, in a way feels like Astarion's relationship with Khazador. Cazador literally tells Astarion that he was made to be consumed, a powerful being manipulating and grooming people to be made for their consumption. And Vlaakith is doing the exact same thing. She's just on a power trip and consuming her people to remain on top. A more direct parallel, though, is Lae'zel and Shadowheart. Lae'zel's story parallels Shadowheart's in the sense that they both kind of somewhat touch on religious trauma. They both definitely have to come to terms with the ways that they were lied to and wronged by their respective gods and upbringing. However, unlike Shadowheart, Lae'zel's story does not tap as strongly into the issues and the trauma that comes with the religious trauma. Sure, in betraying Vlaakith, she is losing everything she's ever known, much like how defying Shar cost Shadowheart her previous community, and potentially cost her her parents. But it's not a focus for Lae'zel's story. Sure, she is a traitor to the Githyanki, but she does not seem to mourn that loss of community. She doesn't seem to be as strongly affected by the loss of her previous convictions. Lae'zel knows her worth, and there's not a struggle to find herself in the same sense that Shadowheart has post-defying Shar. Lae'zel defies Vlaakith, but finds purpose in supporting Orpheus. It's a natural choice for her. And in sense of community, I honestly feel like she builds a stronger community with us at camp than she had at her crèche. She has community in Voss and the others working to free the Githyanki from Vlaakith. She has people she can fall back on. She has a community that will welcome her with open arms. Unlike Shadowheart, although Shadowheart does have the community of camp, and if she really wanted to, the community of Selûnite worshippers, but it's a little bit different for Shadowheart. Instead, Lae'zel's character focuses more on her learning more about the world and herself, and the ways that she can find happiness and purpose. It's the healing aspect of dealing with religious trauma. Whether that's in supporting Orpheus, or fighting to free the Githyanki, or just stepping down and enjoying life, staying in Faerûn, making friends, just being alive, Lae'zel's focus is finding something that will fulfill her. Another interesting thing about Lae'zel's character, just kind of like unrelated to the themes of the story, her fish out of water experience mixed with her straightforward nature parallels the autistic experience very well. So much so that Lae'zel has been claimed as an autistic-coded character. And we all say the same thing about Gale, but for different reason. Lae'zel being autistic-coded is not explicitly canon, but one of those headcanons that does have a lot of support from the source material, and Devora Wild, the actor behind Lae'zel, has shown support for this headcanon as well. But it fits. Many autistic individuals have a hard time navigating these arbitrary social rules and customs that don't make sense, much like how Lae'zel has to untangle and make sense of Faerûn's customs. She struggles with connection because the rules are different from what's natural to her. Lae'zel also says exactly what she means. There's no beating around the bush, which is different from a lot of the other characters in this game. And it's also very typical amongst autistic individuals to speak like this, which is where the assumption that people with autism have a hard time communicating comes from. It's not an issue with autistic individuals trying to communicate, but more misunderstanding with where people are coming from. Neurotypical people, basically people who don't have like autism or ADHD or like anything like that, have these unspoken rules and often speak around what they're trying to say instead of being upfront and straightforward, because oftentimes being straight up is considered rude or something. I don't know. Either way, neurotypical people assume that everyone beats around the bush and doesn't exactly say what they're thinking, and there's a lot left unsaid that you're supposed to infer. And because they speak that way, they assume that the person they're speaking with also speaks that way and should understand that about the conversation and be able to infer what's being left unsaid. Meanwhile, people with autism will approach conversation a lot more directly and literally, saying exactly what they mean and expecting the other person to do the same. So you could imagine the confusion when one person says something, means a different thing, and expects you to understand that they meant something else, but you're coming at it, saying exactly what you think, and expecting the other person to be exact. I feel like Lae'zel struggles with this as well. She's very literal in what she says. She's upfront and doesn't try to leave things unsaid for the sake of being more palatable. She's unapologetically herself, unapologetically honest, and this is probably why I was so quick to trust her on my first playthrough, and why she was my voice of reason. If she says something is a bad idea, I trust that it probably is. It's probably also why I connect so strongly with Lae'zel, despite having like nothing in common with her. Lae'zel's story, while still having elements of trauma and abuse, does not focus as heavily on the effects of said trauma. We see her grow and flourish throughout the game. We see her expanding past what the Githyanki are raised to be, and we see her thrive if we support her in abandoning Vlaakith. Her bad ending doesn't even perpetuate the cycles of abuse. Lae'zel does have to recognize and come to terms with the fact that she's been wronged and the ways that she's been wronged, but her arc focuses more on her growth that's honestly a little bit independent of the choices that the player makes. Even if you push her towards her bad ending, she still spent the game learning to love and to be loved. She still grew to appreciate Faerûn and those that reside within the realm, and she discovered more about herself. In that sense, Lae'zel mirrors Karlach. There's no ending where they perpetuate the cycles of abuse. There's no ending that feeds into their negative characteristics. They either work hard to secure their best chance at life, or they die. Both of them focusing on the journey and their growth, their love for their friends, both of them focusing on living. Both of them potentially being snuffed out too soon instead of given the chance to flourish. Lae'zel is also really interesting in the sense that her story touches on elements that parallel with so many companions, but the thing that she's breaking free from is not the cycles of abuse in a way that's as clear-cut and individual as, say, Astarion and Cazador. Lae'zel is breaking free from a toxic society, unlearning the propaganda that she was taught, and learning to find her own way. She grew up in Gith culture that teaches that you have to be strong and powerful, and if you are not strong and powerful, your victimhood is your fault. That's a shortcoming for yourself, and that's a personal failure. That doesn't sound like a very empathetic culture, and it's absolutely not true. But Lae'zel is able to grow past that, able to learn differently. She's able to see the error in those ways, and she's able to keep parts of Gith culture that are not victim-blamey and terrible, and expand upon that in Faerûn with you, with her new friends, with her new life. Or she's able to free the Gith. I don't know how much of this toxic culture and society comes directly from like the Vlaakith we see. For the sake of making this narrative come together, I want to say freeing the Gith from Vlaakith will also free them from this toxic propaganda culture they live in, but there's no telling. There probably is telling if you know more about Gith culture outside of the game. I'm talking in circles. Either way, that doesn't change the fact that Lae'zel was basically unlearning toxic, abusive society, basically. It's a greater thing that's not as individualistic as the rest of the companions, but it still feeds into the theme of learning to overcome and unlearn the cycles of abuse. And honestly, that might be a bit of a stretch, but that's the way I interpret Lae'zel's character. That's the thing that I get from her story. Thank you guys so much for watching me talk about Lae'zel for however long this video ends up being. A lot of this was my own personal interpretation of her character and the story beats that she goes on. So, if you have a different read, that's totally fair and valid. This is just what I got from her character and what stuck out to me. But this does conclude the Unpacking Origin companions. I don't know if that's the end of the Unpacking series. I am still going to talk about other Baldur's Gate characters like Minthara and Halsin, but it might be just in a slightly different format, because all of these Unpacking videos are structured in a very specific way that is going to be a lot more difficult to do with the non-Origin companions. So this might be the end of the Unpacking series, but this is not the end of me talking too much about Baldur's Gate on the internet. So with that being said, I am working on a house in video. Minthara is coming when I finish my run through that has Minthara. Anyway, again, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will see you all in the next video, whatever that may be. I'm very excited to keep talking about Baldur's Gate. It is my special interest right now. But I also want to start talking about other things again, so we're gonna start being variety. Anyway, if you've like actually watched to the end of the video, I appreciate you. This is great. You know I'm a rambling mess. That's a good place to end it. I'm off script. I don't script my outros, which I think is fairly obvious. Yeah, I think my next video might actually be talking about an anime series that I have not made a video essay about before. But we'll see. There's your sneak peek, your reward for making it to the end of this ungodly long video. Okay, they're not that long. Okay, anyway, I am rambling way too much. We're gonna end it. That's it. That's my Unpacking Lae'zel video. That's everything I needed to say. It's your sneak peeks about what's coming next. And I will see you all next time. Goodbye!